Hey, tonight we're exploring something your mind already knows, even if you don't. You lie there, wrapped in stillness, your body relaxed. But inside your brain, something ancient stirs. A quiet curiosity, a flicker in the dark. Fear, not the loud kind, not the scream and run kind, but the slow, thoughtful kind. The kind that leans in rather than leaps away. There's something oddly soothing about it, isn't there? You're drawn to it. In late-night documentaries about haunted forests, in books that whisper warnings, in movies where things lurk just out of frame. Fear, it turns out, isn't just survival. Sometimes it's comfort, a ritual, a rhythm, a story your brain tells itself to practice what it might do if things ever got real. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy quiet stories like this. If you're still awake, let us know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey begins with a flicker. Not of movement, but of awareness. The way a shadow in the corner of your room suddenly feels more noticeable, even if it hasn't moved. Your brain notices things long before you do, and long after you think they matter. In fact, it notices things even when you're sleeping. Fear, in this form, isn't about threat. It's about attention. Your mind has evolved to linger in the spaces between what is and what might be, the unknown, the maybe, the could have been. Scientists have long studied this strange behavior. Why do people voluntarily seek out fear through horror films, haunted houses, or chilling ghost stories, especially before bed? One quietly fascinating study from Denmark in 2016 revealed something unexpected. People who regularly watch horror content actually sleep better than those who avoid it altogether. Their dreams might be more vivid, but they awaken feeling more satisfied, as if their brain rehearsed something important and finished the script. And here's something eerie. A 2012 study from Japan found that people who experienced pleasurable fear during late-night viewing had a drop in heart rate during sleep, not a rise. The fear stimulated adrenaline during the moment, yes, but afterward, the parasympathetic system took over and deepened their rest. There's a strange kind of comfort in this pattern. The fear rises, then falls, and when it falls, it drops lower than it started, like a tide pulling back, leaving the shore smooth. Why would your brain do this? It may be ancient training, learned in the forests and caves your ancestors slept in, where they listened for sounds in the dark. When the danger didn't come, the body relaxed, deeper than before, grateful it was safe again. You begin to realize, fear isn't just a warning signal. Sometimes it's a contrast, sharpening the calm that comes after. There's a term in psychology called benign masochism. It refers to the pleasure some people feel when experiencing things that are, on the surface, unpleasant, like eating spicy food or riding a roller coaster. Or, yes, being a little scared. Your body activates the stress response, but your mind whispers, it's okay, you're safe, you chose this. This internal duality, tension and trust, is exactly what creates the strange calm of fear. Imagine a child under a blanket, flashlight in hand, reading about ghosts. She knows the story isn't real, but part of her wants it to be. That flicker of danger makes the quiet of her room feel warmer, safer, somehow. The monster outside the closet is never as frightening as the thought that maybe there isn't one at all. Because then, the silence has no shape. There's always been a need for shape, for stories, for creatures in the dark. The eerie detail here is this. Some evolutionary psychologists believe our love of scary stories is rooted in predator avoidance. Telling tales about danger helped early humans remember what to fear. But over time, the tales evolved into something else. Symbols, shadows, myths, nightmares that belonged more to the imagination than the jungle. So even now, as you lie safe in your bed, some part of your brain runs quiet simulations. What if? What then? Just in case. It's not anxiety, it's preparation. The ghost story is a drill. The imagined monster, a rehearsal partner. You confront it, and you win, even if it just means turning off the light and going to sleep. And here's a moment to reflect. Maybe fear isn't something to get rid of. Maybe it's something to get to know. Maybe it's one of the last wild places your mind visits before it can truly rest. Researchers still wonder if this nightly simulation serves a deeper function, not just to prepare for danger, but to remind us that we've survived it before. Again and again. And now, as you continue to breathe softly, your brain knows there's nothing chasing you. But still, just in case, it leaves a light on inside. You lie in bed, eyes closed, body still, but something behind your forehead remains alert, like a night watchman pacing slowly behind the gates of a sleeping town. That's your brain. Not the thinking part that solves puzzles or makes to-do lists, but something older, the limbic brain. The part built for survival, for pattern detection, for whispers in the dark. It doesn't fully shut off when you rest. It waits calmly. It listens for anomalies in the hum of the refrigerator, the shift of wood in the walls, the subtle creak of something that wasn't there yesterday. It is the part of you that says, just in case. Thousands of years ago, your ancestors slept under stars, under leaves, under roofs made from bone or bark. Sleep was dangerous. Predators didn't knock, they crept. And so your ancestors evolved to drift into sleep slowly and never fully let go. Their brains stayed tuned, just enough to the night's soft signals. That wiring is still in you. You might not sleep near lions, but your brain doesn't know that. It still listens for sounds outside your door. It still flinches slightly at the idea of being watched, even in a high-rise apartment surrounded by concrete and traffic. The fear is no longer logical, but it's still there. There's a quietly fascinating study from Sweden in 2007 where researchers tracked brain activity during sleep. Even in the deepest sleep stages, parts of the amygdala, the fear processing center, remain subtly reactive to emotional sounds like laughter, crying, or screams. Not all noises, just emotional ones, as if the brain was filtering the world through a thin curtain, checking whether it was still safe to keep dreaming. And here's something eerie. Humans are wired to notice eyes. Even closed eyes can sense the direction of a gaze. Infants, only hours old, will turn toward a face that's looking at them. In a strange 2013 experiment, researchers placed images of eyes above a self-service coffee station on campus, and people paid more for their drinks, even though no one was watching. Just the image of a gaze was enough to change behavior. So what happens in the dark when your brain can't see the eyes, but still imagines them? You felt it. That prickle on the back of your neck. That vague certainty that something, not someone, but something, might be aware of you. A presence with no source. It's not madness. It's not even irrational. It's ancient. Your ancestors survived because they noticed those feelings. The ones who paused before entering the dark cave lived longer. The ones who assumed something was out there, even when nothing showed itself, passed on their genes. And now, here you are, safe, in bed, perhaps alone, but not entirely untouched by that inheritance. This might be why, even as adults, we sometimes sleep with a hallway light on, or why closing the closet door at night still feels like completing an ancient ritual. You're not superstitious. You're just participating in a neural ceremony passed down through blood and instinct. And here's the curious reflection. Maybe fear isn't a malfunction of modern life. Maybe it's a language, a kind of quiet communication between you and the part of yourself that's older than memory. Researchers still debate whether this sensitivity is adaptive anymore. Do we really need it in a world of locks, lights, and alarms? But others suggest maybe it keeps us imaginative. Maybe this hyper-awareness of the dark isn't just for protection, but also for creativity. Because where else would stories be born, if not from shadows? Close your eyes now and imagine your brain not as a machine, but as a cave, cool, echoing, lit only by the soft torch of thought. In the depths, your inner watcher sits, quiet, unmoving, just watching, not afraid, just waiting. For what? That's the mystery, isn't it? Sometimes there's nothing to see, and yet your brain sees anyway. There's a small, strange truth that neuroscientists have observed. The human brain prefers false positives over false negatives. In other words, it's better to think there might be a threat and be wrong than to miss one that's real. This is called the smoke detector principle. It explains why you jump when your phone vibrates in an unfamiliar way, why a creak in the floorboards makes your heart beat faster, why, even now, some part of you stays alert long after the danger is gone. Even asleep, your ancient brain stays with you. Not out of panic, but out of love, a protective instinct coded so deeply into your bones that it has no language. And maybe that's the thought to take with you into the dark. Your brain isn't trying to scare you. It's trying to keep you here, alive, safe enough to sleep again. You roll gently in bed. The sheets rustle like dry leaves. Somewhere nearby, the world is quieting down, lights flicking off, doors closing, wind pulling its long invisible fingers through trees or wires. Inside, your mind lingers, not on the calm, but on something stranger. A face in a mask, a creaking door, the slow approach of footsteps on old floorboards. Not real, of course, but oddly comforting, because you know how the story goes. You've heard it 100 times. A strange noise, a flicker, a reveal, a scream. Then the credits roll, and everything is okay again. There's a reason scary stories feel good, especially when they follow a pattern. Your brain, wired as it is for prediction and pattern recognition, loves structure. It rewards you for completing loops. And fear, when it's controlled, becomes part of that loop. It rises, crests, and then falls. Just like a lullaby, only darker. It's why children beg for ghost stories they already know the ending to. Why adults rewatch horror films even when they know when the scare will come. Because when the monster behaves as expected, the world makes sense. There's a quietly fascinating study from the University of Wisconsin that examined children's reactions to scary fairy tales, like Hansel and Gretel or Little Red Riding Hood. Kids who heard these stories often had less anxiety at night, not more. The explanation? These tales offered rehearsals. They made danger narrative, something you could hear, imagine, survive, and close the book on. And here's the eerie part. Even animals appear to simulate threat. In 1995, researchers studying rats found that they would repeatedly revisit locations where they'd experienced mild shocks, carefully, hesitantly, but intentionally. The behavior wasn't avoidance, it was checking. A way to re-engage the memory, but this time with more control. Perhaps even courage. The pattern is familiar. Approach, retreat, approach again. You do the same thing. When you watch a scary movie alone at night, your heart beats faster, but you stay. You lean in. And when the credits roll, the silence feels deeper, safer. Maybe that's the paradox. The monster makes the quiet feel more real. There's a soft sort of security in knowing how a fear story unfolds. A haunted house, a hidden door, a moment of tension, then release. Your body braces and then lets go. The chemicals drain. You relax more than you did before. And it's not just stories on screens. Your own mind tells these tales too. Think about your earliest fears, the ones that curled up beside your childhood bed, the dark under the mattress, the figure in the hallway, the thunder outside your window. At first, they were shapeless. Then, slowly, your brain gave them names, shapes, rules, monsters. And here's the comforting truth. Once fear has a face, it has boundaries. Once it becomes a character, it becomes predictable. And what's predictable feels survivable. Even in your dreams, this pattern shows up. Nightmares tend to repeat, not because your brain is torturing you, but because it's refining a rehearsal, giving you another try, another safe glimpse. And still, some questions remain. Why do certain shapes, long-limbed figures, distorted faces, creatures with hollow eyes, appear again and again across cultures? From Japan to Scandinavia, from African folklore to Native American tales, similar beings haunt the edges of the firelight. Researchers still wonder if we're born with a kind of universal fear template, shapes and silhouettes that tap into something ancient, not to scare us, but to remind us that fear, like any instinct, is shared. So now imagine yourself back in one of those stories. The floor creaks, the air grows colder. You know something's behind the door. But unlike the first time you heard the tale, this time you aren't afraid. You know what's coming, and that knowing wraps around you like a soft cloak. This is the strange comfort of predictable monsters. They may appear in your closet, but they won't leave the script. They may chase you, but they'll never cross the boundary of the frame. They give you what few fears in real life can: closure. The unknown becomes known. The dark becomes a stage, and you remain in control. Let yourself drift now, with the knowledge that your brain, in its mysterious wisdom, builds stories not just to warn you, but to soothe you. And as the shadows lengthen and the silence settles deeper, the monsters stay exactly where they belong. You feel it first as a flicker. The heart beats once, just a little too fast. A sound, a shadow, a sudden image, and your body shifts without permission. Muscles tense, eyes widen, breath shortens. This is adrenaline, ancient and automatic. It floods your system before you even register the reason. And though it feels like chaos, it's not. It's precision, the body awakening its hidden reserves, just in case. But here's where it gets curious, because after the surge comes stillness. Adrenaline doesn't last long. It can't. Once the body realizes it's not in danger, that the monster was a movie, the creak just the house settling, the sympathetic nervous system steps aside. It hands the reins to something gentler. The parasympathetic system, which slows the heart, deepens the breath, and whispers, "You're okay now, it's over." This biological rhythm, tension, then calm, is exactly what your body is designed to use for emotional regulation. And ironically, fear can become the very thing that prepares you for sleep. A quietly fascinating study from Utrecht University observed participants who were exposed to horror content before bed. Surprisingly, most did not report disrupted sleep. In fact, a subset experienced longer periods of slow-wave sleep, the deepest, most restorative kind. The researchers suggested that fear, when safely contained, might actually promote emotional processing, and afterward, a more complete physical release. And here's the eerie part. This is the same pattern found in many forms of ritual. Think of ancient initiations or the stories told around a fire. There's the buildup of fear, and then the release, the relief, the catharsis. The group laughs, the tension breaks, and what follows is the softness of rest, the trust that safety has returned. In modern life, the ritual continues. You play the game, you watch the film, you read the story, and once the fear fades, you exhale, deeper than before. It's as if the body needed to be reminded how not to be in control, just for a moment, so it could return to calm with more intention. Even the most extreme examples of fear in sleep, like night terrors, often leave the body completely relaxed after the event. It's as though the storm passes through you, and in its wake, stillness. There's also an odd phenomenon some people experience called post-fear euphoria. The moment after a scare, whether on a roller coaster, in a haunted house, or after a particularly vivid nightmare, when you feel unusually light, even happy, your breath deepens. Laughter sometimes follows, not because you weren't afraid, but because you were, and it ended. This rebound effect, scientists say, may play a role in emotional resilience. Facing fear, even artificially, allows your nervous system to practice letting go. So as you lie in bed now, maybe you remember something that once scared you, a scene, a sound, a place. Your mind replays it cautiously. Your heart maybe flutters just a little, but you know the ending. You always did. And that knowledge, that return to safety, is what invites sleep. It's a little like the ocean. The wave swells, rises high, and then collapses into foam. The beach is quiet again, but it's not the same. It's been washed, softened, ready for the next one. Let yourself drift there. Because there's another layer to this. Your brain learns through these rhythms, not just in waking life, but in dreams. The fear you feel, the rush, the tension, it creates a kind of emotional signature, one that marks memories for importance, one that tells your brain, this mattered. And then the calm that follows, that post-fear stillness, helps you file it away, like a book placed gently back on the shelf. That's why sometimes, after a good scare, you fall asleep faster. The narrative completes itself, the system cycles, the adrenaline fades, and your body, momentarily emptied of urgency, becomes more receptive to rest. And still, researchers wonder, are we meant to fear as often as we do now? In a world of screens and sirens and endless stimulation, are we triggering the system too much? Maybe. But when fear is chosen, when it's symbolic, not chaotic, it becomes a tool, a ritual, a whisper of ancient memory that your body recognizes. Like a familiar song playing faintly from another room, it builds, it peaks, it ends. And then comes the silence. So if your heart has ever raced before sleep and you wondered if something was wrong, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just your body practicing the most human thing of all. Surviving, then resting. And now as your pulse slows, your breath evens out and the air around you cools just slightly. Your body remembers. It is time to sleep. It's quiet now. The kind of quiet that settles between midnight and memory. No cars, no voices, no footsteps from the apartment above, just silence, or so you think. But listen again, not with your ears, with the part of you that waits, that stretches into the stillness like an antenna. There it is, the faintest hum from a distant appliance, a gentle click as the walls shift, maybe the rustle of fabric or nothing at all. And yet, you hear something. This is not imagination. This is your brain's refusal to believe in silence. There's a scientific term for this: auditory pareidolia, when the brain, in the absence of sound, starts generating patterns. It fills in the blanks. That soft hiss of white noise becomes whispering. That random creak, almost a footstep, or something breathing. You know it isn't, but still, your ears never fully sleep. Even when you drift into the deepest stages of unconsciousness, the auditory system remains vigilant, scanning the world for change. Not sound, necessarily, just difference. Because difference means possible threat. And your ancient brain has always believed it's not the loudest sound that matters, it's the newest one. One quietly fascinating experiment at the University of Colorado exposed sleeping participants to low-level audio stimuli, some random, some patterned, some eerily close to voices. Even when the sleepers didn't wake, their brain waves shifted. Tiny ripples of recognition. A ghost of awareness beneath the surface. It's why sleeping with a fan or a rain machine can help. That soft, repetitive background hum creates a sound blanket, something predictable that helps the brain stop searching. The phantom sounds fade, the silence fills in with intention. But in a perfectly quiet room, the brain starts asking questions. Some people experience exploding head syndrome, a harmless but unsettling sleep phenomenon in which a person hears a sudden loud noise right as they're drifting off. A bang, a crash, a voice calling their name. It isn't real, but it feels real, and it leaves the brain wondering why. No one knows for sure, but some researchers suspect it's a kind of misfire. Your auditory cortex shifting gears, releasing tension like a spark. It's eerie, but not dangerous. And it proves something your brain's always suspected. The quiet is never empty. Even now, as you lie here, something in you is listening. This is not about fear, it's about attention. A kind of hyper-awareness that the brain practices when the environment offers no clues. It listens to itself, to blood, to breath, to memory. Sometimes in this state, people report hearing music that isn't playing, a piano, a faint melody. These are called hypnagogic hallucinations, and they're surprisingly common. The brain, unanchored from external input, begins to compose from within. And what it creates is often shaped by emotion. If you feel safe, the sounds are beautiful. Chimes, voices, the wind. If you feel uncertain, they change. This is where the edge of sleep meets the edge of story, where you aren't quite dreaming, but you aren't awake. And in this thin place, your brain listens harder than ever, sometimes inventing, sometimes remembering, sometimes responding to echoes from deep within. You may hear a voice calling from a hallway that doesn't exist, a door creak in a home you've never visited, the laugh of someone long gone. Not ghosts, just data, surfacing. Memories your conscious mind has long forgotten. And here's a reflection to carry with you. Maybe the sounds you hear at night aren't meant to scare you. Maybe they're meant to remind you that even in stillness, you're alive, awake in some hidden way, connected to a world larger than your senses. Researchers still puzzle over why some people experience heightened auditory sensitivity in sleep. Is it trauma? Is it creativity? Or is it just the price of having a brain that never fully turns off? The truth remains soft and open. So tonight, when you hear a distant sound, real or not, don't tense. Let it pass through you. Let your body stay still. Let your breath remain slow. Because the quiet isn't empty. It's a conversation between your brain and the dark. Your breath slows, the edge of sleep blurs. You've left the room without moving. Your body is here, but your mind has stepped across an invisible threshold. And somewhere just beyond, something watches. Not with malice, not with kindness, just presence. It waits until you slip fully under, and then it speaks in dream. This is where the scary things live. But not the kind in movies. The ones your brain invents just for you. A shadow that follows too close. A hallway that stretches longer each time you run. A creature whose face is always just out of frame. A voice whispering your name from inside your own house. You're dreaming, but your body reacts as if it were real. Heart pounding, muscles tense, sometimes even tears. Why does your brain do this? You might think nightmares are glitches, flaws in a system meant to soothe, but they're not. They're tools. They are, in a strange way, simulations. One quietly fascinating theory in neuroscience is called the threat simulation hypothesis, proposed by Antti Revonsuo. It suggests that bad dreams evolved to help us practice danger. They give us a rehearsal space to escape, to fight, to hide, to learn. The brain runs drills, not because it expects the worst, but because it remembers that once survival depended on preparation. And here's the eerie detail. Children, who are more vulnerable in waking life, tend to have more nightmares. Their brains may be training for a world they don't yet understand. By the time they reach adulthood, the simulations become subtler, more emotional, less about monsters, more about memories. You might dream you're late for something, even if you have nowhere to be. You might feel chased, though you never see who follows. Or you may wake with the feeling that something was watching, but you can't remember what. And still, your body holds the echo. These dreams with teeth don't always make sense, but your nervous system listens anyway. The adrenaline rises. Then, as we've seen before, it falls. You awaken more alert, strangely calm, and soon, you forget the dream, but not entirely. Your mind may not replay the images, but your body remembers the lesson. There's also a strange phenomenon known as lucid nightmares, when a person becomes aware they're dreaming during the nightmare. And instead of waking, they stay, they watch. Sometimes they interact. And when they wake, they often report feeling empowered. Not because they weren't afraid, but because they learned to exist within fear without fleeing from it. That's the curious power of dreams. They offer space not just for fantasy, but for facing. Not with logic, but with emotion. Symbolic, surreal. Your brain creates a creature, then learns what it's like to outlast it. And here's where the open question lies. Researchers still debate. Why do some people dream of fear, while others drift through oceans of color and warmth? Is it biology, memory, personality? No answer is final. But one thing's clear. Fear dreams are not signs of weakness. They're a sign that your mind is engaging, testing boundaries, pressing on the walls of the self, softly, insistently. And sometimes, nightmares fade into something else entirely. The door you fear opens, and there's no monster, only light. Or a version of yourself you haven't met yet. Stronger, braver, quietly awake within the storm. So if you've ever woken from a terrifying dream, heart racing, and wondered if something was wrong, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was training. Maybe your brain walked you through the worst, just so you'd remember how to breathe afterward. And if that dream returns again, in pieces, in symbols, you'll know it's not an enemy. It's a messenger, carrying a story not meant to scare you, but to sharpen you. So now, as your eyes soften and your limbs grow heavy, let the strange landscape of dreams stretch wide. Let the creatures arrive if they must. They come to teach, and when they're done, they leave. And you stay. You sleep. There's a reason why certain memories return without knocking. You're lying in bed. It's quiet. Your body is still, but your mind is not. Out of nowhere, an old memory slips in, sharp, sudden, and vivid. It could be a look someone gave you, a moment you'd rather forget, a mistake, a fear, a fragment. Why does that happen? The answer starts deep inside your brain, in a small structure called the amygdala, an almond-shaped cluster buried near the center. It plays a key role in detecting danger, triggering emotional responses, and importantly, locking in memories tied to fear. The amygdala doesn't work alone. It's closely connected with the hippocampus, the brain's librarian, responsible for organizing facts, time, and context. But the amygdala decides how strongly a memory gets stored. If something feels life-threatening, even just emotionally, the amygdala steps in, tagging that memory as important, urgent, not to be forgotten. That's why painful memories are often the clearest. Your brain was never trying to hurt you, it was trying to protect you. But here's the problem. The amygdala doesn't always know the difference between past and present. It remembers the emotion, not the date. So when something even slightly similar shows up, a scent, a phrase, a sound, it might hit you with the full weight of the original fear. You feel your heart race, your stomach tighten. You can't sleep, not because you're weak, but because your brain is doing what it was designed to do. Fear is a survival tool. Memory is its record keeper. But here's the paradox. The same brain that remembers fear also has the ability to reframe it, not by forgetting, but by telling a story. This is where healing begins. Why stories change the brain. Storytelling is not just entertainment, it's biological. From the earliest human societies, stories helped us remember what was dangerous, what was sacred, and how we belonged. But story doesn't just record events. It gives them shape, meaning, sequence, control. When you tell a story, especially about something painful, you're doing more than recounting facts. You're engaging the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic, perspective, and decision-making. You're activating language centers that translate raw emotion into coherent thought. You're stitching fragmented memories together and placing yourself back in the driver's seat. This is called memory reconsolidation, a phenomenon studied in neuroscience and therapy alike. Each time you recall a memory, your brain briefly opens it like a file on a computer. During that window, it becomes editable. You can't delete it, but you can change its emotional weight, its meaning, its place in your narrative. This is what happens in therapy. It's what happens in dreams. And sometimes it happens quietly, when you're alone in bed, simply thinking things through. The scary thing becomes something that happened, not something that's still happening. The memory becomes part of your story, not the whole of it. The role of sleep in emotional healing. Now, here's something even more fascinating. Your brain naturally does this work while you sleep. During REM sleep, especially in the early morning hours, your brain reactivates emotional memories, but with the stress chemicals dialed down. It's as if your mind says, let's revisit that pain, but this time without panic. Research has shown that people who get good REM sleep are better at processing trauma, regulating emotion, and making sense of past experiences. It's a kind of overnight therapy, a quiet act of integration. And often, this happens through dreams. You might dream of something terrifying, but it appears symbolically as a hallway, a shadow, a figure you can't quite name. Or perhaps you dream of resolution, a conversation you never got to have, a moment of forgiveness, a second chance. Your dreams don't always make literal sense, but emotionally, they're doing something profound. Dreaming is the mind's oldest form of storytelling. It rewrites your emotional code without you even realizing it. Rewriting the self. But we don't have to rely on dreams alone. You can tell yourself a story, awake, conscious, and clear. You might begin with, "This thing hurt me." Then later, "But I got through it. And someday, I'm stronger because of it." That's the slow journey of narrative healing. It doesn't erase the past, but it softens it. It repositions you as the protagonist, not the victim. The witness, not just the one who suffered. Even the act of journaling, quietly at night under soft light, has been shown to reduce stress, anxiety, and even physical symptoms. Because when you give your experience words, you give your brain structure. And fear doesn't thrive in structure. It thrives in silence, chaos, and isolation. You don't have to publish your story. You don't even have to share it. Just naming your fear is enough to start reshaping it. What you remember isn't who you are. So tonight, if your mind drifts to old fears, be gentle. You are not broken for remembering. You are not weak for feeling things deeply. You are not haunted, not in the way you think. You are healing, slowly, quietly, just by feeling, remembering, and reframing. Fear and memory may live in the same part of your brain, but so does imagination, so does empathy, so does resilience. You are not the worst thing that happened to you. You are the storyteller who survived it and is still here. And that's a story worth telling, even if it's only to yourself. Even if it's whispered in the dark, even if it only begins with one line. Once I was afraid, but I'm still here. Darkness isn't just the absence of light, it's a space your mind fills on its own. And tonight, as you lie still, letting your breath settle into rhythm, you find yourself quietly drawn toward it. A room that's dim, soft around the edges, becomes a canvas for the imagination. And somewhere inside that stillness, you begin to sense something waiting. Not out there, but within. Your eyes are closed now, but your mind is open, wandering. You remember being small, maybe 5 or 6, standing in a hallway at night, the light behind you, the dark ahead. You weren't exactly afraid, but your imagination had questions. What lived in the spaces the light didn't touch? Why did your heart feel louder in the dark? It turns out, your brain doesn't go quiet when the world goes dark. It becomes more active, especially the parts that make sense of patterns and shape. In pitch black experiments, even in sensory deprivation tanks, people report vivid imagery. Faces forming in the void, voices that weren't there. The brain, craving input, begins to create. Neuroscientists have long known about a phenomenon called pareidolia, your mind's tendency to see meaningful shapes in randomness, a face in a swirl of shadow, a figure in the curtain. It's a survival trick. Your ancestors couldn't afford to ignore a threat that might be there. Better to mistake a shadow for a predator than miss the real one. But what happens when the fear isn't external? When the thing that stares back from the dark is you. You think back to nights when thoughts came uninvited. A regret, a strange dream. The feeling that something unresolved was asking to be seen. Darkness acts like a mirror, not polished or sharp, but warped and fluid, like black water. And in it, you glimpse things you don't always face during the day. Some psychologists believe this is why so many people enjoy scary stories before bed. It's not because fear helps you sleep. It's because darkness gives you a private space to process what you've hidden. A horror film isn't just adrenaline. It's a ritual, a structured fear you can survive inside a safe box. It reminds you, even the terrifying can be named, faced, and passed through. In ancient times, people gathered around fires at night, not just for warmth, but for stories. And often those stories were dark, spirits, shadows, loss, but told with rhythm, with voice, with others listening. And in that shared fear, there was healing. A circle of light in the night where the unknown could be spoken into shape. There's an eerie detail buried in sleep science. The most vivid dreams tend to come during REM cycles, when the body is paralyzed but the mind is fully alive. And what do we often dream of? Rooms we've never seen, people long gone, dangers we never faced. The dark within, staged like theater. In one study, researchers exposed volunteers to complete darkness for 48 hours. What happened wasn't chaos, it was story. Subjects began crafting intricate inner narratives. The mind doesn't idle in silence, it searches for meaning. And sometimes what it finds is beautiful, or strange, or painful, but it finds you. Have you ever had a moment late at night when the dark felt like a presence? Not threatening, but aware? You're not alone. Philosophers from ancient Greece to modern neuroscience have described the dark as a kind of listening, a space that receives thought. Carl Jung called it the shadow self, the parts of us we disown but can't erase. And here's where it gets mysterious. Some studies suggest that people who explore their darker thoughts without judgment actually show lower levels of anxiety, as if making peace with the void calms the storms of waking life, that the monster under the bed just wants to be acknowledged. You shift gently under your blanket. Maybe you're not thinking in full sentences anymore. Maybe it's more of a drift, feelings, fragments, the memory of an old door, the sound of a drawer opening in a quiet house. None of it's real, but it's yours. And it's always been there. Fear, it turns out, is one of the oldest parts of you. Not an enemy, a guide. It leads you to what still matters, what still hurts, what still hopes. Researchers still wonder why the brain responds so actively to imagined fear and safety. Why watching a scene in a film can spike your heart rate like real danger. Is it empathy? Is it rehearsal? Or is it a deep old code teaching you again and again that you can survive the things you imagine? Because you do. Every night you face the void, and every morning you return. And now the darkness is quiet again. No threat, no urgency, just space, a soft mirror for your thoughts. You're floating in it. No story to tell just yet, only the hum of your mind gently slowing. Maybe the darkness isn't a void after all. Maybe it's a doorway. You're lying still now, cocooned in silence, eyes closed but wide inside. Somewhere beyond this moment, your waking mind would tell you to look away from danger, to avoid what hurts, what scares, what unsettles. But here, in the soft, dim edges of your resting mind, you begin to notice something strange. You don't look away. In fact, part of you leans in. You've done this before, 100 times. Watching the shark inch closer in a documentary, reading about a near-death experience, clicking on a headline that whispers, "This will disturb you." And still, you look. Your breath shortens, your skin tingles, and your focus sharpens. Not out of fear, but curiosity, compulsion, hunger. This, scientists have found, is no accident. Your brain is wired to light up in the presence of threat, even imaginary ones, because that response kept your ancestors alive. But the deeper truth is this: fear doesn't just protect you, it fascinates you. In the brain's reward system, that glowing circuitry of dopamine and reinforcement, fear and pleasure are closer than you'd expect, especially when the danger isn't immediate. When you're safe in your room, under blankets, watching someone else walk toward the dark, your mind gets a strange rush. It's called benign masochism, the thrill of experiencing fear while knowing you're actually safe. Horror movies, skydiving, ghost stories, even spicy food. These experiences trigger fear responses just enough to be thrilling, without risk. The body says alarm, but the mind knows it's a game, and it loves the game. This is why people slow down to look at a car crash, why we peek through fingers during a scary scene, why true crime podcasts and survival stories dominate late-night playlists. The closer the danger, the more intimate the thrill, but only if we can keep it outside the fence, behind the screen, on the page. Not real, but real enough. There's a name for this paradox: morbid curiosity. And it's not a flaw. It's a signal fire in your mind, alerting you to patterns, behaviors, consequences. A way to mentally rehearse crisis, like if that were me, what would I do? How would I escape? What does this teach me about the world, about people, about myself? Researchers using fMRI scans have found that when people engage with morbid or disturbing content voluntarily, the brain doesn't just activate threat centers. It also engages parts linked to self-reflection, moral judgment, and learning. In short, we don't just watch horror for kicks. We're trying to understand something. Even children do this. Around age 4 or 5, kids begin playing games like Monster Chase, pretending to be eaten, hiding from imaginary ghosts. Why? Because they're building emotional muscle, practicing how to feel scared and then safe again. You've probably done it yourself in dreams. That moment when you realize something is chasing you. You run, you panic, but then you wake up. Your heart's racing, but you're fine. And somehow part of you feels stronger. You faced the imaginary and survived. That feeling, that's dopamine too. That's the brain rewarding you for enduring something intense, even if it was just pixels, just fiction, just a night terror that vanished with the dawn. But here's the twist. Your brain doesn't care that it wasn't real. Emotionally, it was. Your limbic system doesn't make clean distinctions between fact and fantasy. So when you sit on the edge of a dark story, when you stare into the eerie or the tragic, you're walking a wire between fear and fascination. And your brain? It eats it up. It's no wonder that bedtime stories so often flirt with the macabre. Think of old fairy tales, children lost in forests, witches hiding in candy houses, beasts with glowing eyes. These were not soft lullabies. They were survival simulations, wrapped in myth, filtered through metaphor. Here is the dark, but here is how to get through it. Modern science is catching up to what our ancestors always knew. Fear, like any deep feeling, is not just to be avoided, it's to be understood. And when you allow yourself to explore it safely, something unexpected happens. You begin to own it, to integrate it, to grow. So tonight, as you lie here listening, maybe you sense a flicker of that same magnetic pull, a part of you not pushing fear away but studying it from a distance, softened by the voice, safe in the silence, watching the signal fire from across the hill. Because you can look away, but you don't. You look through. And what you find on the other side might just be another layer of yourself. There's a strange moment that happens sometimes, maybe to you, maybe to everyone. You watch something terrifying or read something dark, a shadowy forest, a faceless stranger, a terrible thought. And just when the fear rises like a wave, something shifts. You feel calm, not outside, not in your body, but somewhere beneath that. A hush, a pause, a curious quiet. Your heart might be racing, your skin prickling, but your mind, the deeper dreaming part, has found a room inside the fear. And in that room, somehow, you feel safe. This is not what we were taught about fear. Fear is supposed to drive us away, supposed to send us running, fighting, freezing. But there's a paradox at the heart of how our minds respond to threat. It's not always about escape. Sometimes fear is a doorway, And on the other side, your imagination has already built a refuge, a kind of emotional bunker tucked inside the scariest parts of your mind. Why? Because fear isn't always the signal to flee. Sometimes it's the signal to feel, to sit with the discomfort, to make sense of it, to find something beautiful growing in the ruins. Neuroscientists have a term for what's happening here. They call it threat reappraisal. When you encounter something frightening, a sound, an image, a thought, your amygdala jumps to red alert. But if your prefrontal cortex recognizes that the danger isn't real, it steps in. It calms the storm. And in that pause, in that slow breath, your mind begins to rewrite the fear. What was a monster becomes a metaphor. What was a scream becomes a story. You're not running anymore. You're listening, exploring, watching the fear soften, reshape, reveal something underneath. This is why people return again and again to the same eerie stories. The haunted house, the dark forest, the monster under the bed. Because each time the brain gets better at decoding the fear and turning it into meaning. It's not just about surviving the terror, it's about transforming it. A child dreams of a beast in the closet and then draws it the next morning, gives it a silly name, makes it dance. An adult reads a chilling novel and comes away not disturbed, but comforted, because inside that fear was truth, insight, even relief. It's not the fear itself that soothes us, it's the containment. The fact that the fear has a frame, a border. The lights are still on. The page ends, the screen goes black. The voice, like this one, is calm, slow, safe. That's when your brain does something remarkable. It begins to nest. It takes the scary thing and builds a little room inside it, not to hide, but to rest, to breathe, to look around and say, okay, this isn't real, but it matters, and I can hold it. This mental shelter is more common than we realize. People recovering from trauma often use stories, dark ones, to process their pain. Veterans read war fiction. Survivors of abuse watch revenge thrillers. People who feel alone listen to melancholy songs. Not to wallow, but to witness. The scary thing becomes a shared thing, and that makes it less heavy, less sharp, less lonely. There's a word for this in Japanese, yugen, the profound, mysterious beauty of the dark and unknowable. The ache of something vast, beyond understanding, that still touches the heart. It's the feeling of watching fog drift over a ruined castle, the hush after a thunderclap, the moment in a sad song when your throat tightens, but it feels good. Fear, when held with care, becomes a kind of medicine, and the mind knows this. So it makes a room, not always a happy room, but a meaningful one. A room with questions instead of answers, with symbols instead of facts. A place where your deepest feelings can unfold without judgment. Because here, inside the scary thing, no one is watching but you, and you are not afraid of yourself. Not really. So tonight, if your thoughts drift toward the eerie, the strange, the shadowy corners of human experience, let them. Not to frighten you, but to remind you your mind is vast enough to hold even the darkest things with light. You built this room for a reason, and here in this quiet moment, it welcomes you. Not to escape the fear, but to rest inside it, to sit down on the floor and exhale. Some people don't just dream fear, they act it out, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. You open your eyes in the middle of the night, except you don't. Your body moves, rising, turning, walking, but your conscious mind stays asleep, suspended in a dream. The hallway feels familiar but warped. The shadows stretch in the wrong directions. A distant sound grows louder, but no one else is awake. You are alone, or you think you are. This isn't a dream, but it isn't waking either. It's something stranger. something in between. Sleepwalking, night terrors, REM sleep behavior disorder. These are not rare glitches in the mind. They're reminders that sleep is not just a switch we flip, but a world we enter. And in some people, that world doesn't stay neatly tucked behind closed eyelids. It spills outward. A man bolts upright in bed and starts shouting, terrified of something no one else can see. A child sleepwalks out the front door at 2 a.m. and is found blocks away, barefoot in the cold. An elderly woman punches at invisible figures in her sleep, reliving memories she can't bear to name. This is the dark undercurrent of dreaming, the part that acts without permission, the part that turns fear into motion. To understand what's happening, you have to zoom into the sleep cycle, into REM, the rapid eye movement phase, when dreams are most vivid. Normally, the brain paralyzes the body during REM like a safety harness, so your dreams stay dreams. You can fly, fall, run from monsters, but your limbs stay still. Protected, but sometimes the harness fails. In REM sleep behavior disorder, RBD, the brain forgets to hit the brakes. The dreamer moves, fights, cries out. Sometimes they even leave the bed. Their bodies believe the dream is real. It's more common than we think, especially in older adults, and particularly among people who later develop Parkinson's or other neurological conditions. For them, the boundary between dream and reality thins too early. They begin living inside their nightmares before waking knows it. This isn't just creepy, it's profound, because it tells us something essential about fear. That it doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't always follow the rules. Sometimes fear finds a voice even when the rest of you is unconscious. That's how deeply it lives in us. And yet, not all fear in sleep is harmful. Night terrors, for example, mostly affect children. Their brains are still wiring together the complex choreography of sleep, and sometimes that wiring gets crossed. A child may sit up, scream, breathe hard, eyes open, face frozen in terror, but they're still asleep. They won't remember it in the morning. To the outside world, it looks like horror. To the child, it's a flicker, a glitch that passes like a storm. But what does that say about the architecture of the mind? That even in its most vulnerable state, sleep, the brain rehearses threat. It plays out worst-case scenarios, not to torment you, but to prepare you, to strengthen the circuits, sharpen the instincts, build emotional muscle. Fear in sleep is a kind of rehearsal, a mental fire drill, and sometimes the performance spills into the real world. But here's the strange comfort. Even in these unsettling episodes, your brain is trying to protect you. It's just overreacting, like a guard dog that wakes the whole house when a tree branch falls. The fear isn't senseless, it's just loud. And sometimes it's not fear at all. Some sleepwalkers wander with eerie calm. They tidy the house, eat from the fridge, rearrange furniture, ask strange questions. Their bodies are moving through a half-lit version of the world, driven by internal maps that don't need light or logic to guide them. It's unsettling to witness, but from the inside, it's usually blank. The walker doesn't remember. The fear lives only in the eyes of those watching. And maybe that's the most mysterious thing about sleep-driven fear. It's asymmetric. It doesn't follow the same emotional logic as waking fear. You can be terrified in a dream and wake up laughing, or act out something horrific and remember nothing at all. Fear, when detached from memory, becomes performance without context, a shadow play. Still, it reminds us of something vital, that the mind never really turns off. Even in sleep, especially in sleep, it's telling stories. Some beautiful, some strange, some deeply unsettling. And in rare moments, those stories step off the stage and walk through your room. So if you've ever felt the eerie weight of a nightmare that lingers after you wake, or found yourself frozen in the dark, sure you heard footsteps that weren't there, or seen someone else, a partner, a child, a friend, whispering or weeping in their sleep. Remember, this is the subconscious trying to speak. It doesn't always use words. It uses motion, image, emotion without language. And in doing so, it shows us a deeper truth. That fear is not just something we experience, it's something we embody, even when we don't mean to, even when we're asleep, even when the room is quiet. But something in us still stirs. You know the kind of story. It's whispered at campfires. It's told at sleepovers, late, long after the lights go out. It's passed down from older siblings, cousins, folklore books, Reddit threads, or just the eerie silence between two thoughts. And somehow, even though you know it isn't true, you check under the bed anyway. Scary stories have a strange staying power. They outlive empires. They outlast logic. They adapt like myths, surviving in whatever shape the culture allows. As legends, creepypastas, TikTok voiceovers, or bedtime tales in disguise. But here's the real question. Why do we tell them at all? What is it about ghost stories, haunted dolls, monsters in the woods, or the man at the end of the hallway that makes us want to carry them forward, even when they disturb us? Why do these dark little stories survive? One answer is evolutionary. Fear grabs attention. A rustle in the grass could be wind or a predator. Better to be jumpy than dead. So brains that paid attention to fear survived, and those same brains became storytellers. Stories were our first simulations, our earliest warning systems. Before we had science, we had folklore. Don't go into the forest after dark. Why? Because the Baba Yaga lives there, because the woods eat people, because the last person who went in didn't come out. That's not a bedtime story. That's a survival protocol. But over time, the warnings took on shape, and names, and settings, and they became entertaining. Scary, yes, but also fun. The kind of fun that wakes something ancient in your nervous system. The kind of fun that feels like you're practicing for danger. Because you are. Psychologists call this benign masochism. The enjoyment of negative emotions when we know we're safe. Like watching a horror movie, or riding a roller coaster. Or telling a story that makes everyone scream and laugh in the same breath. It's safe fear. Contained fear. A sandbox where your brain can explore catastrophe without consequence. But underneath the jump scares and ghosts, scary stories are often carrying something else, something hidden, a whisper of truth, a moral code, a cultural fingerprint. Look at old fairy tales, the originals, the dark ones. Little Red Riding Hood was about stranger danger. Hansel and Gretel warned of famine, poverty, and abandonment. The Pied Piper was a reckoning on broken promises and what happens when adults betray their word. These stories weren't meant to soothe. They were warnings in disguise. And even today, that function hasn't gone away. Modern horror echoes old fears. Zombies equals fear of plague, conformity, or losing your individuality. Vampires, sex, disease, power, addiction. Ghosts, grief, regret. The past that won't stay buried. Even urban legends, the vanishing hitchhiker, the killer in the back seat, the babysitter who gets the call from inside the house, all reflect real anxieties. We're afraid of strangers, of betrayal, of being watched, alone, vulnerable. But scary stories let us name that fear. And once it has a name, it's a little less powerful. Here's what's fascinating. The scariest stories often have no real ending, no justice, no clear explanation. The thing in the woods just remains. The ghost keeps knocking. The the dream doesn't resolve, and somehow that makes them stick. Your brain doesn't like open loops. It keeps running them in the background long after the story ends. That's part of why these tales survive. They haunt your attention. They linger, but they also teach, not in the moral of the story way, but in a softer, subtler sense. They teach vigilance, empathy, boundaries, intuition. They show us what to fear and how to survive it. And sometimes they do something even more powerful. They give shape to feelings we didn't know how to express. A story about a haunted house might really be a story about growing up in chaos. A monster under the bed might be how a child explains trauma. The end of the world zombie fantasy? Maybe that's how you process burnout or grief or just the slow collapse of the news cycle. In this way, scary stories don't just survive despite the fire. They survive because of it. They walk through fear and come out holding something human, something true. So next time you tell a scary story, or remember one late at night while your house creaks, notice what else it's saying. What old fear is being rehearsed? What lesson is hiding beneath the shadow? What ember of truth is still glowing at the center? Some stories survive because they scare us, but the ones we keep are the ones that help us understand that fear. And maybe, just maybe, make peace with it, even if we still leave a light on. Just in case, you're lying still now, maybe with a soft blanket draped over you, or the quiet hum of a fan whispering through the room. But somewhere, in the quiet space between thoughts, your body remembers something older. A chill, a tremor, a ripple across the surface of your skin, goosebumps. You don't always notice them, but when you do, it's usually because something just shifted. A sudden breeze, a melody too beautiful to explain, or a line in a story, sharp, strange, and perfect, that sends a shiver down your spine. It's easy to forget that this reaction has a name. The technical term is piloerection, the tiny muscles at the base of each hair follicle contracting, raising the hairs on your arms and neck, a vestige of something ancient. You feel it when you're cold, or when you're scared, or even when you're deeply moved. Why does something so small, so automatic, carry so much meaning? Because it's not just your skin reacting, it's your entire evolutionary history unfolding in real time. Long before blankets and heaters and houses, your ancestors lived in open landscapes, under skies full of stars and predators. They didn't have words for fear or awe or chills, but their bodies responded to both the cold and the unknown the same way, by bristling. Why? Because raised hair made them look bigger, more threatening, a biological bluff to scare off danger. It also helped trap warmth, insulating their skin against wind and cold. For animals, this was survival. And though your skin no longer grows the kind of fur that matters in that way, the mechanism never left. Now it whispers in moments of vulnerability, in awe, in fear, in music. It's the body's way of saying something important is happening. Interestingly, not all goosebumps are about threat. Some are triggered by aesthetic chills, those full body waves that hit during powerful music, emotional scenes, or moments of spiritual connection. Researchers have studied this with brain imaging, and the results are beautiful. When people experience goosebumps from beauty, their dopaminergic pathways light up, the same reward systems that govern pleasure, love, and motivation. In those moments, the brain isn't saying danger. It's saying, pay attention. Your skin becomes a listening surface, a biological radar tuned to emotion. Even in sleep, the body remembers. And yes, goosebumps can happen during sleep, especially in vivid dreams, particularly nightmares. Your autonomic nervous system doesn't fully shut down just because your eyes are closed. In fact, emotional dreams can provoke the same physiological reactions as waking fear: increased heart rate, shallow breath, and sometimes the tiny, invisible shiver of piloerection. There's something haunting about that your skin responds even when your conscious mind is absent, as if it's carrying out its ancient duty without needing your permission. The fear might not be real, but the body doesn't care. It's ready anyway. Goosebumps also serve a poetic function, a kind of body poetry, a non-verbal punctuation. They show up when something lands inside you, not just intellectually, but deeply. You can feel perfectly safe and still shiver when a voice hits a certain note. You can feel perfectly calm and still tense up when a dream turns dark. You can feel deeply understood and find the hairs on your arms rising without warning. Goosebumps are one of the few bodily reactions we haven't fully learned to control or hide. They just appear, small, quiet, honest. They are what's left when language fails. And maybe that's what makes them so mysterious. Because you don't get goosebumps from knowing. You get them from feeling. That sense that something just crossed the threshold between the ordinary and the unknown. That you've stepped, even briefly, outside the self and into something larger. It might be fear. It might be beauty. It might be the soft edge of a memory brushing past your heart in the dark. But your skin knows before you do. It rises. Just a little. A quiet flag waving in the night. Tonight, your body remembers the cold. Not the air, exactly, but the sensation of vulnerability, of watching the dark for danger, of hearing the branch snap and holding your breath. But also, it remembers survival. It remembers the warmth that followed, the return of breath, the hush of safety, and it knows, better than you do, when to settle again. So if you feel that shiver tonight, that tiny lift of hair at the base of your neck, don't run from it. Lean in. Your body is speaking the language of ages, and the night is listening. Imagine you're lying in bed. Everything is still. And then a sound, a knock, not loud, not aggressive, just there, brief, hollow, familiar in a way that's hard to explain. Maybe it came from the door or the wall or the space behind your thoughts. You wait, nothing follows, no second knock, no voice, no explanation, just silence. Your brain goes to work immediately. That's its job, to make sense of the uncertain. Was it the pipes, the wind, the house settling, or something older? Something else? We're pattern-seeking creatures, trained by evolution to fear the unknown more than the known. Because if you can name a thing, you can fight it, or flee from it, or prepare. But when you can't name it, when you just hear the knock and there's no one there, something stranger happens. Your mind opens a space for it. A hallway with no end. A door without a knob, a question that never quite gets an answer. And strangely, you learn to live with that. This kind of fear isn't the loud, panicked kind that screams run. It's the quiet kind, the kind that sits just outside your line of sight, humming gently, the kind that doesn't chase you because it knows you'll keep turning back to look. There's a name for this subtle dread. The uncanny. It's when something feels almost normal, but not quite. A knock that sounds just a little too slow. A shadow that doesn't move right. A face that almost looks human. The uncanny doesn't terrify. It unsettles. And sometimes that's worse, because it lingers. Here's something curious. Your brain is wired to resolve stories. When you hear a mystery, your mind races to complete it. But in the case of the unanswered knock, there is no satisfying resolution, no monster, no threat, just a presence that never introduces itself. And yet, The mind doesn't short circuit. Instead, it adapts. It finds a place in the architecture for uncertainty. It builds a quiet room in the mind where the unexplained can sit. Not solved, not forgotten, just accepted. This is true even in dreams. In sleep, your brain can conjure entire worlds, some logical, some wild, and still the unanswered knock returns. It might be a knock on your childhood bedroom door, or on the wall of a place that doesn't exist. Sometimes you answer it, sometimes you can't, but always there's that feeling. Something is there, and it won't say what it wants. And then you wake up. The knock fades, but the feeling stays. And that feeling is ancient. Long ago, our ancestors sat in caves listening to the night, to creaks, to taps, to footsteps they hoped were the wind. They didn't always find answers, but they learned to watch, to wait, to listen. And maybe they taught their children and their children's children that fear doesn't always mean danger. Sometimes it just means be still. Something is passing through, and it might not leave footprints. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as open-ended threat, fear that comes without form, without closure. It doesn't wound you. It doesn't resolve. It just hangs in the space like a question mark you forgot to erase. But the strange part is, we can live with that. The unanswered knock becomes part of the rhythm, part of the background, a sound you expect, not because it should be there, but because it always is. And over time, that fear stops feeling like an intruder. It becomes a companion. Think about the stories that haunt you most. They're rarely the ones with neat endings. They're the ones that leave something out. A figure in the rearview mirror, a voicemail with no voice, a knock that never repeats. The scariest stories aren't the ones that scream. They're the ones that whisper. You will never know. But here's the comfort buried in that discomfort. Not knowing is not the same as being in danger. Uncertainty is not the enemy. In fact, the more you make peace with it, the more powerful you become. Because now, when you hear that knock, not just in the room, but in your life, you don't have to answer right away. You don't have to chase the explanation. You can let it echo. You can let the silence follow, and you can rest, even as the mystery stays unresolved. So tonight, if you hear something or feel something, a presence you can't name, a sound you can't place, just listen, breathe. Let the unanswered knock remain unanswered, because not all fear needs a face, and not all questions need to be closed. Some are just meant to walk with you, quietly, into the dark. There's a moment, just before sleep truly takes you, where everything blends, where your thoughts begin to flicker like candlelight. Memories tangle with dreams. A sentence forms and never finishes. The world becomes soft, and time bends at the edges. And in that moment, the unknowable slips in beside you. Not to harm, not to explain itself, just to be there, like fog rolling in without a sound, like a star you can't quite name. Sleep, for all its peace, is not just rest, it's surrender, a letting go of control, of answers. It is trust. You close your eyes and allow your body to fall into a realm where you are not the driver. And in that realm, your mind does something remarkable. It learns to coexist with the unresolved, with the strange, with the surreal logic of dreams and the soft hum of forgotten fears. It welcomes the things that don't make sense and doesn't demand that they do. We often think of safety as clarity, as understanding. But in truth, some of our deepest peace comes not from knowing everything, but from being okay with not knowing. The child who sleeps with the door cracked open doesn't need to see what's in the hallway. They just need to know the light is there. And maybe that's what this final stillness is. A soft light in the dark, A place where the monsters aren't gone, just quiet, just acknowledged, just unthreatening. The unknowable doesn't have to be terrifying. It can be vast, wondrous, even kind. Think of the ocean. You don't know what's beneath the surface, but you still let the waves hold you. Or space, infinite, silent, and forever out of reach. But when you look up, you don't feel fear. You feel awe. The truth is, your brain was never built to solve everything. It was built to survive, to wonder, to adapt. So when it encounters something strange, a thought, a presence, a memory that doesn't make sense, it learns to carry it gently, to fold it into the quilt of consciousness, not as a flaw, but as a thread. And in sleep, those threads are woven without resistance. That's why dreams are rarely clean or logical. They are places where the impossible is ordinary, where a hallway becomes an ocean, where a voice comes from a mirror, where someone you lost smiles at you from a place you've never been. And none of it needs explanation. Because in the dream world, meaning doesn't have to be sharp. It can be soft, felt, not solved. So as you rest now, you might feel something stirring in the corners of your mind. An echo, a question, a face that never turned around. Let it be. Let the unknown stay unknown. Let the strange walk beside you, not as a warning, but as a companion. This is the gift of sleep. It holds space for the irrational, the forgotten, the unexplained. And in doing so, it teaches you something valuable. That peace doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. So tonight, rest easy. Let the fog of sleep carry the questions with you. Let the strangeness drift in and settle beside the comfort. You are not lost. You are not in danger. You are simply in the presence of mystery. And that too is part of being human. Close your eyes, breathe slow, and let the unknowable watch over you as you sleep. Because sometimes the most peaceful dreams begin with a whisper. You don't have to understand. You just have to rest. And now, the story drifts to silence. Not because it's over, but because your mind knows what to do next. To wander, to rest, to fold all this strangeness into something gentle. You've journeyed through fear and memory, through science and shadow, and somehow you've made it here, to the quiet, to that weightless place between waking and dreaming. Let it hold you. Let the echoes fade. Let the strange things sleep too. Because tonight, you've met the monsters, the memories, the mysteries. And you didn't run. You listened. And in doing so, you made a home inside the unknown. Good night, traveler. We'll see you on the other side of sleep. Until then, keep wondering.